I believe our next speaker might be also giving the hint of a warning from what I'm suspecting. Now, we've been talking and hinting at a universe, a spiraling universe, all day, one form or another. Well, who would have believed that while 40 years ago, a young graduate student was in Jamaica studying the spirits of animals, his father would be in Dallas, Texas, marrying Joanne Stroud. Sorry to do that to you. But isn't that right?
The dates.
Yeah, that's right. It's extraordinary. So this vortex ring swells and inverts, and then today brings into our midst a cultural anthropologist from the Smithsonian who has, I'll let him tell his story. He was telling me a little bit about it last night, but what a powerful story to be able to, it just felt to me, be invited into an inner realm, a real spiritual realm of a people we know nothing about, and to be honored in such a way as to be allowed and asked and invited to carry their secrets. Dr. Kenneth Bilby.
I'd like to say thank you very much to Joanne Stroud and to the Dallas Institute for the invitation. It really has been an enriching experience so far. And I want to say that I'm hoping that I'm not too much of a fish out of water, to use an animal situation. Once again, I'm not sure whether Natasha got that one in her panoply, but I say that because I'm coming from a very different disciplinary background from most of you. It's not just that I'm an anthropologist, but I'm a very field-oriented cultural anthropologist. So I tend to go about things in a very different way, of course, but I think there are some real intersections. So I don't think I'll be too much out of my element. I'll be out of my element maybe, but not too much, hopefully. And what I want to say about these images is that these are, I intend these really as evocations. I'm not going to actually say anything specific about most of the images. They do relate directly to what I'm talking about, but there's no one-to-one correspondence in terms of the persons I'm talking about here. Some of them are the very same persons. Others are other people I knew in similar roles. Another thing I want to mention is that for reasons that I think will become apparent, you'll see, except with maybe one exception, no non-human animals in these slides. So it might seem odd, but hopefully it become apparent why. So there are animals, myself included, in the slides, but no, mostly no non-human animals. So could we begin, could you play, I wanted to play, before you put it on, a short bit of music from this area in Jamaica, recorded in 1978. And I'm going to say nothing more about this music, just ask you to listen and let it speak to you however it will, except I do want to say a couple of possibly useful things. One is that this type of music is called, this particular category is called a pakit song. Pakit, P-A-K-I-T. The other thing I want to say is that this song and this type of music would not exist if it were not for animals. Okay, and one more thing, one more little bit of thanks. I wanted to thank Gail Thomas for setting the foundation a little bit with her talk this morning, because as you'll see, there's a component of my talk which is quite snaky. So in his essay, The Animal Kingdom in the Human Dream, James Hillman asks the fundamental question: why do they come to us, the animals? What do they want inhabiting our dreams? I found myself wondering the same thing 40 years ago as a young, unsuspecting graduate student who was obliged to confront the spirits of animals in his own dreams while embarking on an anthropological study in Jamaica. When I speak of a Jamaican spirit world and not the Jamaican spirit world, I do so for good reason. The spirit world in which I encountered these animal beings is unknown even to most Jamaicans. It is a largely closed spiritual realm that only the members of a few Jamaican communities have access to. These communities were founded by a special people known as the Maroons. That's their English name. They know themselves as Kyatawood or Chankofi, and they have other names. They are descendants of Africans who escaped from British slave plantations during the 17th and early 18th centuries and fought their British captors for nearly a century, finally forcing the British colonial government, exhausted by decades of war, to sue for peace in 1739. Through two separate peace treaties, the Maroons won recognition of their freedom and the legal right to govern themselves on semi-sovereign territories deep in the island's mountainous interior. Since this time, the Maroons have maintained distinctive identities and intimate cultures that, until very recently, were almost entirely hidden from the eyes and ears of outsiders. What I initially hoped to focus on in my research was traditional Maroon music, which had never seriously been studied before. It was this determination to learn about music that led me willy-nilly into the Maroon spirit world. For as I was soon to find out, the better part of traditional Maroon music was inextricably interwoven with the ceremonial tradition known as Cromanti play or Cromanti dance. To learn about and truly understand Maroon music, I would have to learn about Cromanti play. The fact is that almost from the beginning, I was not in control of most of this process. As I began to meet Maroon specialists willing to participate in my project, most of whom were much older than I realized that the only way to learn anything of value was to submit entirely to their methods. One of the first teachers to reveal how things would have to be, whom I shall call Washman, suddenly explained to me one night that the time had come to clarify our roles in what he had come to define as a joint project. As recorded in my field journal, quote, "He has decided that I am his apprentice, as this is how he referred to me several times. He told me that I must choose soon the kind of animal spirit which I desire for my pocket." By this time, I had learned from several specialists I had begun to work with independently that each possessed a special spirit known as a pocket, and that I too would have to somehow come by such a spirit were I to hope to learn about the music of Cromanti play or anything related to it. But what form of spirit exactly is a pocket? At the most basic level, a pocket is an animal spirit. It can, at times, take the form of any number of creatures, including a snake, a toad, a frog, a lizard, a vulture, a hawk, an insect, an eel, a cat, a fish, or a crayfish. Those are the ones I know of. In practice, however, a pocket is rarely a pure animal spirit. For over time, many of these animal spirits have become intertwined with the human spirits of their former owners, the deceased Maroon ritual specialists of past generations. This happens because when a pocket man, or a pocket woman, as such specialists are known, dies and joins the world of the ancestral spirits, the two spirits stay together, merging into a single spirit being. Thus, most often, a pocket is an ancestral human spirit fused with the animal spirit with which he or she worked closely during his or her lifetime. A second fundamental point about pockets is that they always arrive as gifts, and they always arrive in dreams. The ideal and most powerful kind of pocket is pure animal spirit and arrives of its own volition because of the love or strong liking it has for the individual it has selected. In a vivid dream, it presents itself as a gift and reveals its intentions. But more often, the spirit that arrives is that of a human ancestor whose spirit is already fused with the animal spirit he or she worked with while alive. In any case, whether the arriving spirit is pure animal or a combination of human ancestor and animal, all practitioners worthy of the name pocket man or pocket woman receive their pockets spontaneously, unsought. Soon after this, sometimes almost immediately, the pocket possesses or rides its selected owner, who at first may behave erratically. But in future episodes, the possessed person will begin to act more methodically, as a Chromanti spirit medium should. Over time, the newly minted medium will start to function as a recognized pocket man or pocket woman at Chromanti dances, ministering, often while in a state of possession, to the spiritual problems of living persons. In future dreams, the pocket will also continue to teach its owner directly about the spirit world and the techniques used to tap spiritual powers. For those who wish to practice as a Chromanti specialist, but are not fortunate enough to receive the gift of a pocket directly from the spirit itself, there is another way. Such persons may instead receive a pocket indirectly, though spontaneously still, as a gift from another living human being. For, as it turns out, a practicing pocket man or pocket woman has the capacity to confer a new pocket on an aspiring spirit worker. In this scenario, the pocket man or woman accepts the novice as an apprentice and leads him or her through a series of elaborate ritual procedures. This is the pre-existing frame into which I myself was fit when I first arrived among Chromanti practitioners seeking knowledge. One wonders whether this maroon cosmology, with its animal spirits known as pockets, might have struck Hillman as a dream of a case study, perhaps even as a kind of ethnographic gift to the field of archetypal psychology, combining as it does in a single package so many themes that seem to run through his work. For example, as we have seen, pockets manifest first and foremost in dreams. They are representatives of the spirit world, divinities, one might say. They come as guides, helpers, and teachers. These are all his words. They come to heal, bringing knowledge of medicinal plants. They are companion animals of a sort. As imaginal presences, they are dynamic, fully alive. In Hillman's words, they walk around on their own legs. Although they belong to the wilderness, they choose to make themselves co-present with human beings. Indeed, when the spiritual self, this human spiritual self, of a pocket man or woman finally departs from the flesh, animal and human spirits become one, forever inseparable, transforming this co-presence on an individual level into something eternal. When reading Hillman on animal presences, and I'm new to his work on animal presences, so it was a great experience reading this. When reading Hillman on animal presences, I was moved, indeed at times enthralled, by the frequent resonance of his thought with the Jamaican maroon spirit world I had come to know. Yet, as a cultural anthropologist, field-oriented cultural anthropologist, I am apt to view the phenomena I have just summarized more through culturally informed readings of the minutiae and the dramas of daily life in specific social settings, than to search for what they might reveal about universals of the human psyche. Simply put, the behavior of maroon pockets was deeply embedded in a web of social and cultural meanings specific to a local world. One, I should add, that was almost entirely closed to outsiders. This level of analysis, of course, and understanding exists on a different plane from archetypal psychology, though it's not completely separate. Yet another way of understanding these phenomena is through cultural history. These maroon animal presences, no matter how ethereal and ineffable, did not simply appear out of the mists in the mountains of Jamaica. They have a history. Much of this history reaches back to the regions of Africa from which the ancestors of the maroons were taken. And I've done a fair amount of research in terms of trying to trace things and look at historical roots and origins. So we know enough at this point to say that to ignore the African sources of the maroon concept of pakit would be to miss out on an important, if not essential, dimension of these animal spirits. Although I began this work among Jamaican Maroons with goals and preoccupations of my own, as I suggested earlier, these did not govern the shape of this endeavor as much as I had originally thought they would. Early on, drawn into a series of apprenticeships with Maroon ritual specialists, I was obliged to relinquish much of the control I had expected to exert over my project. In many ways, I believe this was for the better, for it gave me an experiential entree to this world that could be gained in no other way. It is in reconsidering this experiential dimension of my research that Hillman's work has proven most helpful to me. As I return to my field journal and my notes from 4 decades ago, I recall how, in a way perhaps analogous to a psychoanalyst in training, I myself became one of the dreamers, a subject in my own study. Consider the following passage, recording one of my visits with the ritual specialist I shall refer to as Hunterman. January 20th, 1978. We went into the house and he informed me that from now on, we are not going to waste time on instruction purely from his mouth. He had decided to go through the operations that will allow me to learn directly from spirits in my dreams. At first, he was planning on preparing a bandana with which I would have to tie my head every night before going to sleep. After going through all the motions, I will immediately begin to receive teaching in my dreams. I am to come to him periodically to relate these dreams, which he will interpret for me. There's no postponing this. He's adamant. The time is now. In order to learn anything further in safety, I have to submit to this treatment. As the process continued, I reported on later visits. In one such instance, I wrote the following. February 10th, 1978. I told Hunterman that I dreamt about a large spider 3 nights in a row, and each morning when I woke up, I could see the same sort of spider on the ceiling over my bed, either crawling or hanging. Then, coming back after washing my face, I could see the same thing lying on the bed, but dead. I picked it up each time and threw it out. This happened 3 mornings in a row. Hunterman asked if I was sure the spider was dead each time, and I said yes. He said that was a very good sign. If the spiders on my bed had been alive, it would have been bad, but as it happened, it was a good sign. The next thing that is supposed to happen is that I will wake up one morning to find a red comb in or next to my bed. I am to take this and put it in my bag and leave it there. Sometime soon after that, I will notice that my bag is bulging, filled up with something. When I look inside, I will see a kind of life there, moving around, most likely a snake with red beads around the head, but maybe a frog or toad. I'm not to bother it, but just take some rum and blow it on it and say out loud, Yafime, meaning in Jamaican Creole language, you are mine. Then it will disappear and I won't see it again till I leave Jamaica. In one more entry, shortly after this, the next step in the process is described. February 12th, 1978. On Wednesday, I again saw Hunterman, who now feels that he's done his part. He has put me on the path to gaining a spirit, and therefore he will no longer teach me anything. He will only interpret for me anything I can't understand in my dreams. However, this shouldn't be so necessary from now on, as the spirit is supposed to come to me directly and speak to me clearly about the things I need to know. Obviously, these ultimatums were not fully acceptable if I was to continue my work and complete my larger research project. I needed to be able to keep questioning and conversing with my teachers, patiently and cautiously, to enlarge my understanding of a range of things that were unlikely ever to be revealed to me in dreams. And I could not limit myself to merely observing Cromanti play ceremonies, relying solely on my own uninformed and culturally blinded perceptions to make sense of it all. Nor was it feasible for me to continue in the role of a non-maroon pocketman in training, for I had to be honest with myself. I did not wish to become an actual practitioner of these maroon spiritual arts. I did not look forward to being possessed by the spirits of maroon ancestors and using their powers for healing. That would have been nice. Having no other option, I gradually renegotiated my relationships with each of these teachers, withdrawing from the formal apprenticeships they had initiated, proposing instead to continue learning from them as much as I might, only as much as I might, without having to become a practicing pocketman. Animal presences remained an important part of my experience in this new phase of research, for I had already been admitted partly into the spirit world and had already learned enough about it to be considered not an entirely alien presence. On many occasions, I encountered and even had conversations with pockets possessing their mediums. At such times, the ancestral human component of the spirit was dominant, while the animal component remained hidden, except when it chose to express some of its characteristic animal qualities through bodily forms of communication, such as its medium's dance movements. As Hillman recognized, the psychological power of animal spirits such as pockets stems partly from the fact that, under normal circumstances, they are invisible. The invisible is as important as the visible, he tells us. I cannot claim to have seen any of these animal spirit beings myself, at least not in an identifiable form. But to a maroon who owns one, a pocket, when visiting an animal form, is quite visible, as my teachers liked to remind me. At times they would joke, semi-seriously, about maybe permitting me a glimpse of what was normally hidden from human sight, even though I had decided not to pursue the path of becoming a pocketman myself. One of my teachers, whom I shall call Herbsman, toyed with me one night by raising the possibility of encountering a pocket in tangible form, moments after revealing to me some of his spiritually empowered paraphernalia. I described this in the pages of my field journal as follows. I remember it as if it were yesterday. February 7th, 1978. Herbsman asked me if I would like to see a pocket, if I would like to see something which looked like a hawk, but was really a spirit, if I would like to see it alight on the railing right next to me. He answered for me, no, I wouldn't. It would be very frightening to see. He asked if I'd like to see a snake pocket wrapped around his torso, neck, and shoulders. He assured me I would be mystified, as the snake would appear like no ordinary snake, such as one might encounter while working in a cane field. No, this snake would be luminous. It would give off light of its own, shining and glowing like the kerosene lamp inside the house. As I prepared to leave, Herbsman began to hold a conversation with his spirit, staring directly in front of him off the porch. There were indeed times when I was given to understand that I had seen with my own eyes more of such things than I should have. I recorded one such unnerving experience in my notes, which occurred late one night as I was on my way home from Herbsman's house. April 26, 1978. Herbsman sent me off with splashes of rum at my side. As I walked toward the gate, I noticed that right in front of me, the outline of an indeterminate animal very rapidly dashed across the path, about 3 feet in front of me. It was very dark. It was 2:00 a.m. The following night, I found myself at a Cromanti ceremony in Herbsman's compound. As I recorded in my notes, quote, "Last night I was departing, just after Herbsman had sent me off with a few splashes of rum. I saw a vague form like a small animal, although I couldn't see what kind. It went flashing across the path in front of me. I stopped for a moment to look and then went on. When I related this to the spirit possessing Erbsmann, he became angry and raised up his machete in a threatening posture directed at me. He simply told me that I must never mention that again. After retelling the members of the family about it, they apologized for me, telling him that I didn't know that such things were never to be spoken about. Later in the morning, when the pocket was no longer possessing Erbsmann, I asked him why such things were never to be mentioned. He merely asked me what the form passing in front of me looked like. Before I could answer, he said, "A snake?" It did, in fact, move in a snake-like way, even though I couldn't clearly discern its form. It was something which had been sent out to follow me on my journey home, Erbsmann informed me, without a hint of doubt in his voice. That is why I should never mention it, for I wanted it to follow me, and if I were to do the wrong things, such as talking about it out loud, it would leave me and turn back. A few months later, Erbsmann and I were sitting on his porch discussing spiritual matters. Once again, I turned to my field journal to summon up the details of an experience that decades later remains a poignant memory. June 27th, 1978. As we sat and continued chatting, I noticed something very strange out of the corner of my eye, a sort of pattern of light, shifting its disposition as I changed the position of my head. At one moment, it looked like an illuminated section of a Nancy rope, meaning a sort of thick spider web. At the next, like a reflection cast by a shiny object. Only it didn't appear to be actually projected upon the wall, but rather seemed to somehow occupy the space between me and the wall, as if it actually possessed three-dimensional depth. I described the phenomenon to Erbsmann in detail after it had disappeared. I had observed it for a good 20 to 30 seconds. And he showed not the slightest hint of surprise or curiosity. Instead, after a pause, he asked me, "Ken, why are you looking at my thing like that? You shouldn't look at that. It's mine, you know. Leave it alone." Further talk of what I had seen that night was out of the question, but I needed no additional clarification. I knew what Erbsmann was suggesting. I had caught a glimpse, wispy and fragmentary though it was, of his pocket. And the implication was that had I completed my training as an apprentice and become a thoroughly primed pocketman, I would have been able to fully make out this luminous apparition for what it was, a snake. I'd like to close with a visual image that speaks to me in a peculiarly moving way, summoning up this very moment in my past. It is a reproduction of a painting by Margot McLean, taken from her and James Hillman's book, Dream Animals. It is hard to describe how this image makes me feel. It is the closest I have come to visually reliving this moment, for it captures in a single evocative image something uncannily close to the vision, the feeling of the vision I experienced that night. Its title is simply Snake. Here, I believe, we may be plumbing the depths of something very real, something that reminds me of a dimension of what I learned from these experiences with maroon ritual specialists that is hard to pinpoint, but just as valuable as the reams of detailed ethnographic documentation of maroon life I eventually came away with. It is true that we can understand much about these imaginal animal beings by fitting them into the flow of local social life at a given moment, carefully learning about the human community of which they are a part, and trying to grasp the specific cultural framework within which its members structure their relations with one another and make sense of the world. But this will not tell us anything about why these spirit beings take the kinds of imaginal forms they do. Nor will tracing these animal presences to an African cultural matrix across the ocean answer the question of why they took these shapes and not others in their original autochthonous emergence. To address this puzzle, we must return to Hillman's fundamental question with which I began. Why do they come to us, the animals? In another part of the same essay, he suggests what I see as an answer to at least part of this question, arguing that a proper psychology ought to, quote, see the animal kingdom is first of all an aesthetic ostentation, a fantasy on show, of colors and songs, of gaits and flights, and that this aesthetic display is a primordial instinctual, in quotes, force laid down in the organic structure, end of quote. Having begun my stay with the Maroons planning to learn about music, only to discover that first I would have to experience the animal beings that shared this sacred sonic inheritance with human musicians and dancers, I find Hillman's conception of animal presences, if I understand it correctly, persuasive. It suggests that these Jamaican Maroon animal presences, like others, derive a good part of their power through unspoken aesthetic principles lodged deep within the psyche. As images, they stir something beyond the verbal. Like music, indeed, through music and dance, they move their Maroon owners, as they moved me, in irreducible, mysterious ways. Through their visitations and dreams, my own as well as those of my Maroon teachers, they reveal, I believe, as Hillman seems to have fathomed so well, some of the deepest wellsprings of our common humanity. Thank you very much.